lives of the rich and famous. We're interested in what they wear, because that's what's in style now, and we've got to get what they wear and everything. And then we watch them when they go to congratulate themselves with their little award shows and the red carpet and everything. And then later on, people publishing the most uncomfortable looking dresses at the Oscars, and stuff like that. And you look at the picture, and some of the pictures, they look really uncomfortable. I mean, certainly I wouldn't want to wear any of those dresses, but okay, it took a little while there. But we're fascinated with them. And then when people like that, when they talk, we give them credibility, and we even consider them to be experts in whatever they're saying, even if they've never even looked at the subject before. We give them that expert status, and if that's how they feel, then that's how we should feel, and so on and so forth. And we do that all because they are rich, they are famous, they are successful, or they are powerful. In fact, several years back, there was even a TV show hosted by Robin Leach. You remember Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous? Great show. It had an 11-year run, and for about 9.5 to 10 of those years, Robin Leach was the host of it. And it explored all of these wonderful lifestyles that these people who are rich and powerful and important live. 11 years it lasted. How long do you think that a show entitled Lifestyles of the Poor and Obscure would have lasted? Not many, huh? This infatuation with the rich and powerful and so forth is by no means new. It's been characteristic of society for a long time. I mean, think back even to the days of Shakespeare. Okay? When he penned the play Romeo and Juliet, it wasn't just two everyday, ordinary, average teenagers in a town whose parents didn't like each other. But it was the son and daughter of the two most powerful and influential citizens and families in fair Verona. And on the other hand, there are those who are weak and poor. They are the nobodies, the average, everyday, normal, regular people. Most of the time we ignore the nobodies. Or the ones that we perceive to be nobodies. We're just not interested in them. And in some instances, we even despise them. Every society has its classes of people who, quote unquote, don't count. Every society has its class of people that are beneath the decent people. Others feel superior to them because the nobodies don't matter. In the Jewish society of the first century, there were the somebodies, the powerful, the wealthy, the influential, and then there was everybody else. And everybody else was nobodies. So how did Jesus treat the nobodies? I mean, did he write them off as lazy, no good, and worthless? This morning I want us to take a look at Jesus and the nobodies. To do this, I think, first of all, we have to understand a very key element to how Jesus treated the nobodies, and that is that Jesus loved the nobodies. He absolutely, without question, loved the nobodies. Now, don't misunderstand, he did have contact with the rich and famous. He was there sometimes with them and everything, and he ate dinners at their houses and so forth. Some examples of the quote-unquote beautiful people that Jesus had contact with. The rich young ruler who said, I've done everything I'm supposed to do. What more do I lack? And Jesus said, sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, and then come and follow me. And you'll have treasures in heaven. And he went away sad because he had an awful lot of treasure here on earth. There's Nicodemus, the ruler of the Pharisees who came to Jesus at night. and Joseph of Arimathea, whose tomb Jesus borrowed, short term, 3 days, for himself. There were the other religious leaders, the Pharisees and so forth, that Jesus dined with and, verbally sparred with. And there was Pilate and Herod that Jesus had contact with. See, the thing about it is, though, is that even when he had contact with the beautiful people of society, he didn't say many good things about the upper classes, did he? He warned that it would be hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. In his parables, the rich are often seen as the bad people, the bad guys in the story or gals in the story. His greatest conflicts were not with the crowds of ordinary people that flocked to him. His greatest conflicts were with, the elite rulers and leaders. When you read through the Gospels, you can't evade the conviction that Jesus, it seems deliberately provoked and irritated and exasperated the very class of people that we think it is so very important that we appease nowadays. But it wasn't just a one-way street, because the rich and famous didn't care much for Jesus either. They were opposed to him almost from the start. You want to know why? Because he wasn't one of them. He was the son of a carpenter, of a common laborer. He wasn't supposed to try to be one of them, yet he tried teaching people. They didn't like that. He threatened their way of life. He threatened their authority with the people. He seemed to actively undermine their authority with his teachings. And incidentally, it was the rich and famous, those with influence, they were the ones who sought and plotted to kill Jesus. He did have contact with the rich and famous, but most of his contact was with the nobodies. You notice the characters who crowd the pages of the gospel. And all of the people that Jesus had coming to him and following him, they were fishermen, tax collectors, prostitutes, the poor, the handicapped, the failures, children, women, Gentiles. A listing of Jesus' followers wouldn't be a who's who list. A list of Jesus' followers would be a who's not list in first century Jewish society. And yet, it seems that when you read through the Gospels, that Jesus actually went out of his way to find these people and encourage them to follow him. See, Jesus had the amazing ability with these folks. He took people with no significance and he gave them significance. Jesus took nobodies and made them somebodies. Let me share with you briefly 4 examples of Jesus and the nobodies. 4 examples of how he took people that were nobodies, made them somebodies. People that were insignificant and gave them significance. The first would be blind Bartimaeus, the physical nobody. His story is found in Mark chapter 10, if you want to turn in your Bibles to Mark 10. Before you can understand, though, just how nobody blind Bartimaeus was, you have to understand something of the plight of the physically handicapped in the ancient world. You see, in the ancient world, sickness was seen as a sign of God's judgment. Those who were sick or handicapped had done something wrong and they deserved to be sick or handicapped. In fact, in John chapter 9, Jesus heals another blind person. And before he does that, the apostles, the disciples, ask him a question. Teacher, who sinned that this man was born blind? His parents or him? Even the apostles had the idea that, if somebody was suffering from some sort of handicap, it was because they had done something wrong and they deserved it. You consider primitive medicine. Mark chapter 5 verse 26 tells us about the woman who had the issue of blood, and she had spent all she had on doctors, but instead of getting better, she grew worse. Tells you about the physicians of the day, I guess. And there was no Americans with Disabilities Act. There was no Social Security. There was nothing for these people to fall back on. Begging was the only recourse left to most handicapped people. They lived in the most abject of poverties. So the story of blind Bartimaeus, Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52. And they came to Jericho. And as Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples, and a great crowd was with him, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. This story confirms what we know about the plight of the physically handicapped people in ancient times. He was a blind beggar. He was set by the city gate. And you notice in the story the attitude of the crowd of people that were around Jesus. Bartimaeus is crying out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And they're saying, "Will you be quiet? He don't have time for you. You are a nobody. You don't count. You just need to sit there and be quiet and let Jesus deal with us somebodies. Let Jesus deal with us who are not nobodies." And see, they tried to silence him. They tried to set up some sort of an artificial buffer around Jesus. Because some people deserved to be with Jesus, but some people didn't. But notice Jesus' attitude toward the man. It was not that he was a nobody. Jesus' attitude was that he was a somebody. He stopped. See, Jesus could have gone right on. No one would have thought the less of him. Everything would have been fine. He could have ignored what he heard and everything. But he didn't. Jesus stopped. You got to love that. You got to love that about Jesus. And he had the man brought to him. And he asked the man what he wanted. And then he healed him. You see, the bottom line is that Jesus thought this man was significant. And Jesus thought this man was important. Let me ask you a couple of historical questions. Who was the emperor of Rome at this time? Who was the leader in Greece or Spain or China or any of the other developed countries in the world at that time? Who wasn't? We could probably do a little bit of research. Pull out our phone, click on Google, enter that, and boom, we know who it is. But isn't it strange that in reading the most important reference book that was ever written, we know the name of just some beggar who happened to have contact with Jesus? Doesn't that excite you? Doesn't that excite you? Because so many times we see ourselves as nobodies. But because Jesus thought him to be important, the true value of blind Bartimaeus is shown. The true value of him, not just to people, but the true value of him to God is shown. Then in Mark chapter 5, we have a demon-possessed man, which shows us how Jesus handled the emotional nobodies. The plight of the emotionally disturbed in ancient times, well, this man was obviously deranged, okay? Undeniable. They were out and they were ostracized. They were driven away from society, left to fend for themselves whatever they wanted to do, but the decent people tried to just forget that they existed. They were put out of the town, put outside in lonely places. Well, Jesus brings sanity to this tortured soul. Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 10. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains. But he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What do you want to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. And we know the rest of the story, don't we? The herd of pigs is feeding, and they say, "Send us into the pigs." And Jesus says, "You can go." And the herd of pigs rush down the steep bank into the water and drown. Those tending the pigs go back to the city. They tell what's happened to the man and what happened to the pigs. And the whole town starts coming out to Jesus. A crowd is gathering. Verse 15 tells us that when they got out to where Jesus was, they found this man that was deranged and possessed by legions of demons, dressed and in his right mind. See, while everyone else tried to subdue the man, Jesus actually set him free. While everyone else was trying to say, "How can we bind this guy so that he won't be a problem to us, so that we can forget that he exists?" Jesus frees him. You know, the healing is significant, but I think of even more significance is the fact that Jesus thought this man was significant. And he thought this man was worthy of his attention. And so instead of running away from him like most people did when they see this crazed lunatic running towards them, Jesus spent time with him. He healed him. And in Mark 5, verses 18 through 20, it says, "As Jesus was getting into a boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might go with him. But he did not permit him, but said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you.' And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled." This guy had a story to tell about what Jesus had done for him. And the funny thing is, he told it. He told it to anyone and everyone who would listen. And then we have another example is the Syrophoenician woman or the Canaanite woman in Matthew chapter 15. I'm going to be turning over there. Matthew 15. Canaanite woman, the social nobody, the plight of the social outcast in the ancient world. Specifically Jews. The Jews didn't want to have any contact with anyone except Jews. Or at least good Jews didn't want to have any contact with anyone but Jews. Good Jews. See, you were either a Jew or you weren't. It was that simple. Pretty easy, pretty period, right there. We look at the story, Matthew 15, 21 through 28. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, Lord, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, Send her away, for she is crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She said, Yes, Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. Here it seems we have Jesus doing the very thing that we claim that he would not do. She was a Gentile woman, and she has a need, and she comes to Jesus, and he ignores her. She was a social nobody to the Jews. And Jesus not only ignored her, he eventually insults her, calling her a dog. But in fact, Jesus in this story underscores that in the mind of Jesus, nobody is a nobody. That everybody has significance. This woman was important to Jesus, and Jesus wanted this woman to be important to his disciples as well. So we see the attitude of the disciples. They want Jesus to send her away. They don't care about her. They don't care about her daughter. They don't care about nothing to do with her because she is not Jewish, because she is an outsider, because she is a nobody. And she shouldn't be bothering them. That shows how this type of thinking was deeply ingrained in the Jews. They taught that the only reason Gentiles were ever even created was fuel for the fires of hell. That's what Gentiles' purposes were. But then we see the words of Jesus. He starts by telling her, not go away. But he tells her, our ministry is only with the Jews. Seems to be saying no to her request, but at least he's acknowledging her now. But she keeps on asking. She keeps on begging. She keeps on wanting Jesus to do this for her. And then he says, I'm sorry, we don't deal with dogs. That's where he's insulting her, calling her a dog. Funny thing is, though, while in our 21st century ears we take that as an insult, she didn't see it as an insult, did she? In fact, she takes that image and runs with it. She seems to say to him, you know what, I will gladly be your dog if you will be my master and I can have a crumb from your table. And what does Jesus say? This is actually one of 2 times in his earthly ministry that he says someone has great faith. And he says, may it be done for you as you desire. That's incredible. Certainly he is commending her for her great faith. But also I think he's rebuking his disciples for overlooking such faith simply because of something racial or social standing. Then finally, let's turn our attention to Luke 23, to the thief on the cross, the moral nobody. You have to understand the plight of the criminal in the ancient world. There was not the leniency that we see today, no reform philosophy in the ancient world. You got what you deserved. Period. End of discussion. If you were caught doing something against the law, you were punished to the full extent of the law. One thing a convicted criminal did not get in the ancient world was mercy. So we look at the story, Luke 23, 39 through 43. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him. saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since we are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due rewards of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." What an incredible story. While other people saw this thief, this criminal, as a nobody, Jesus saw him as a somebody. Where the ancient world said a criminal deserved no mercy, Jesus showed mercy. In the middle of the most important event in all of history, He takes time to deal mercifully with a repentant sinner. That's just awesome. So how do you treat the nobodies in your life? Those people who are physically not as blessed as you. The people who emotionally aren't as stable as you. The people who socially aren't as likable as you. The people who morally are not as righteous as you. How do you treat them? Do you treat them like Jesus would have you treat them? Do you treat them as just as important and valuable to God as, I don't know, you are? Or do you try to ignore them altogether? Remember that nobody is actually a somebody. And that somebody actually has a soul that will spend eternity in one of two places. Do you remember several years back when it was fashionable to wear a little bracelet around your wrist made out of plastic or rubber, whatever, and it had 3 letters on it, or 4 letters, WWJD. What would Jesus do? You remember those? Good. They were good things to do, to wear, but what would Jesus do for the nobodies in your life? I think a better question for us to ask, though, is what would Jesus have you do for the nobodies in your life? You see, because far too often we just simply ignore the nobodies. We pretend that they don't exist. We pretend that they're not important enough for us to deal with. We don't pretend, but we know, well, maybe they smell a little bit funny. Maybe they look a little bit different. Maybe they wear clothes that obviously haven't been laundered in a while. What would Jesus have you do for those people? Because those people, as dirty and smelly and as stinky and as forgettable and as much as we want to avoid them and ignore them, those people have a soul. A soul that is going to spend eternity one of two places. And you say, well, but the way they look now, I don't know they want to be with me for all of eternity. Well, guess what? With that attitude, they're going to be with you for all of eternity. And not where you want to be. Every person that you have contact with, no matter how popular or unpopular, no matter how rich or poor, no matter what they look like on the outside, they have a soul that is so important to God that He sent Jesus to die for them. How important are they to you? This morning, if you're subject to the invitation of Jesus, we want to provide an opportunity for you to respond. Maybe you've realized that you haven't been treating the nobodies in your life very good, or not like Jesus would have you treat them. Maybe what you need to do is simply just pray where you're at, asking God to help you to change. Maybe you need to publicly respond. whatever that case is, don't leave here this morning with things not right between you and God. And if we can help you to make things right through a public response, won't you come to the front now as we stand and sing together?